And welcome to another episode of Coaching Outdoors. And we are going all the way to the other side of the world to Australia to welcome our guest today, Susan Joachim. It would be amazing if you could introduce yourself to our listeners and watchers.
Thanks, Anna Marie. I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where I live and where I work and where this podcast is coming to you from. And that's the land of the Wadurung people. I'm here sitting in Geelong, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. My name is Susan Joachim, and I'm living here in Australia. I have been here since 2010. My birthplace is Sri Lanka. So that's where I come from originally. And I serve currently as the president of the International Nature and Forest Therapy Alliance.
Thank you so much, Susan. And thank you for doing a traditional beginning to our podcast today. We really appreciate it. And thank you for your respect to the area in which you are currently residing and sitting today. So thank you so much for that. All of our podcast listeners and watchers will know that we always ask this question of our guests as the very first question, because we are so intrigued to know more about people's past and where their love for nature came from. So it'd be wonderful if you could share with us your earliest memory of being outdoors and why you particularly love the outdoors so much.
Yes, let's start at the beginning, right? Coming from Sri Lanka, a warm, beautiful tropical island, I think my love of nature came from my grandparents. They love nature. They were very much into plants, exotic plants. I think my earliest memories are the beautiful garden they had. And I think this love of nature came from them. It was a pretty simple lifestyle. We didn't have televisions. We didn't even have a land phone at home. So I was surrounded by nature. I was surrounded by curiosity. You know, what we now know as a nature deficit disorder in children simply didn't exist when I was growing up. We would wait for our parents to have their afternoon siesta, and all the kids in the neighborhood would get out on the street and just, run wild and free through nature to the beach. And I think I carry, and I will always carry, those wonderful memories of childhood throughout my life.
And it's amazing the number of guests that we have who link it back to their grandparents and the memories that they have with that generation, and how it's often spending time outdoors and in their company that is what kind of resides with them, several decades later. So thank you for sharing that, and almost leapfrogging forward and joining the dots. It would be just great to hear like an oversight of your coaching story and how you specifically decided to work outdoors with your clients.
I think, carrying that story forward and that love of nature. When I joined the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, as is commonly known, in Sri Lanka, I worked in human resources and personnel management, but also project development, which took me outdoors to visit farmers, to visit people who were cultivating the land, who had different projects going on out in the regions, in rural areas. And I saw how happy people were leading that simple lifestyle surrounded by nature. So my job really took me outdoors to see and witness that. But it also gave me a fantastic opportunity, which I think very few people on this planet can boast about. And that is an opportunity to go to Rwanda. And I climbed the mountains and I saw the gorillas in the mist. So I've had my Diane Fossey moment. And that those experiences in my professional life, I carried with me when I came to Australia. And one of the first jobs I was offered here in Melbourne was the branch manager for the Australian Institute of Professional Counsellors. And I would go on hikes outside of Victoria and come back to the office absolutely exuberant, lively, happy. And I would see counseling students walk into the white rooms down the hallway and do their practical components of their work as part of their training to become counselors. And I would sit there and think to myself, wouldn't this be wonderful to do outside if counselors can be trained and have the skills and the confidence to take counseling outdoors, coaching outdoors. So that's how I got really interested in this aspect of taking our work outdoors. You have read books by Florence Williams. There's a wonderful book called Your Brain on Nature. And I also got really interested in the science and the research that was beginning to come out. And women were talking about these amazing topics. It had come out of the realm of scientific research where dominated by men. It was like women were taking up coaching outdoors. And I thought, it's like a breakthrough moment for the industry as well. And, that's how it basically started, this wanting to take people outdoors, because I thought the real healing happens outside.
We've had so many guests share their answer to that question and their backstory, and every guest's backstory is obviously unique to them and so different and so broad ranging. I have to say, we haven't had a gorillas in the mist moment yet. That to me is on my bucket list. I have to say, I don't know if it'll ever happen for me, but to have a conversation with somebody who's actually been there is just wonderful. And we love asking that question for that reason, very much like, what's your earliest memory question, because it just really helps people who are maybe thinking of taking their coaching practice outdoors, helping them to realize that nobody has the same journey. Everybody's journey to the outdoors is different. Everybody's connection to the outdoors is different. And it's just about really finding what your personal connection is. And then how can you then build that into your practice, or have that, as you said, that aha moment, or that moment of realization that you can do this outdoors. Just a little bit more, we'd love to know a little bit more about your background. So you traveled to Japan to obtain a certificate in forest medicine, and I'm going to look down at my notes just to make sure I get this right, to the International Society of Nature and Forest Medicine. What prompted you to do that and go into that realm of forest medicine, so taking it from that therapy area into the forest medicine? What prompted you to do that?
Well, firstly, traveling to Japan, which is the birthplace of Shrinin-yoku, which we know translates to forest bathing. I was absolutely intrigued when I first heard the term, because to me, it encapsulated what I had experienced when I slowed down in nature, which was quite different to my hiking and being very sportive. For me, my hiking was about the destination rather than the journey. But Shrinin-yoku spoke to my experience of really noticing nature and noticing what it did within me, the outside experience and its influence of the person in me and who I was, and how it was beginning to shape my thinking. Also the fact that being Sri Lankan, I also realized, and I knew and had experienced the close cultural relationships that Sri Lanka had with Japan. So there were a lot of touch points that really intrigued me about Japan. And I thought, this is where this all started. This is where all the science and research emerged from. I need to go and meet people like King Lee and Dr. Miyazaki and all these amazing researchers who had done such wonderful work. And then I realized, well, there's Inform. There's this training coming up, and it was a no-brainer. I was on the plane before I could even think more about it. And the reason I wanted to do that was, like I said, I wanted to go to the source. I wanted to learn from the very people who started this practice. And I also wanted to visit these amazing places which were called forest therapy bases. And these are places which are specially set aside for stressed people from Tokyo or Seoul to go and have that recuperation and to really immerse themselves in the medicine of the forest. So it was this simple curiosity, but also wanting to create a bridge. That was another important thing for me, which I didn't recognize and didn't realize till I actually got there, because all this science and research had been conducted in the 1980s, but we hadn't really heard much about it. And I believe that was a language barrier, because there was not much happening in terms of getting it out there beyond the Japanese or the Korean population. And they were very, very honored that people like me from faraway lands wanted to come and understand and learn and speak and participate in something that was slowly becoming more globally known. They were, and I really treasure how they responded to our coming there. It was a wonderful experience and a good learning. And I got a lovely certificate for it as well.
Oh, the bit of paper at the end. It's always a good one.
Yes. And, from the hands of someone like Dr. King Lee and Dr. Imai, another wonderful woman, a Japanese woman who was a world-class mountaineer, she was talking about forest therapy and forest bathing. It was a very exciting time.
And I just love the story that's tracing around the world, but the roots and these deep connections as well between countries that you are ultimately following. And this idea of building a bridge as well, the research done back in the 80s, and it's really only 30 years later that actually it's having a global reach, and people are really kind of understanding the value and what it can bring. And this whole kind of disconnect sometimes between the academic world and the real world, and how can we make it accessible, and how can we really communicate and share, is ultimately part of our mission that, Alex and I kind of see that we're on, to support kind of the wider community. And it would be really interesting just to find out, a little bit more about the course. And then also how that then has influenced your practice, kind of bringing this knowledge back, and then how has it shaped your practice moving forward, and then very much having a look into maybe a typical inverted commas session. Clearly every session is different, and if you're able to illustrate that with some client stories, and that would be amazing. Our listeners and watchers are always keen to have that kind of fly on the wall moment when you can have a look into someone else's practice. Very much as coaches and therapists, we work very individually, so to be able to have that is a real great offering, though clearly with client confidentiality and respected.
Good question, Anna. When I went to these forest therapy bases, and this is where the training happened, so it was over a weekend. It was a weekend training, simply because the people who were there already had done some prior research themselves. We had understood what forest therapy is, so they didn't have to re-explain. It was more geared to people who were trying to go deeper into the practice. So there was lectures with lots of people, and then we were all taken to a forest therapy trail, a trail that had been certified. So Japan has certain standards which they apply before they certify a particular trail as a suitable forest therapy trail. So we were taken there, and I learned a lot just being guided by the forest therapy guides who were trained by Inform there. So it's that experiential learning, I think, that really helps, that really sticks. You can read a lot, but it's really experiencing it and doing it and following the activities, the place-based practices that they taught us, by simply doing it and by us following that. So we were taken to, for example, a waterfall. And I remember Dr. King Lee actually asking us with safety in mind to get as close to the waterfall as possible, because the negative ions that are created by water falling on rocks is beneficial for our health. we were asked to lie down on a platform of, a sort of a stage made of wood and look up into the canopy. The Japanese call this phenomenon komorebi, or what we know as dappled light, and to close our eyes and to experience the shadows across your closed eyelids. That is known to calm down our nervous system. So these 2 days were packed full of information, just not all the heady sciencey stuff, but also the experiential learning, the actual walking on the trail. We did sort of, let's call it Tai Chi or Qigong activities, like slow, gentle movements. So these, going there and experiencing it for myself was then bringing those practices back and looking at how we incorporate this now in a culturally appropriate way as well to an Australian audience. I haven't deviated too much from what I've learned. So typically a forest therapy coaching session would be, it could be 1 hour, but we prefer it to be around the 2 or sometimes a 3 hour session, a duration. And we would start. So for example, I did a session on the first day of spring last week. We had all the wattles in Australia in full bloom. So it's a perfect time to introduce something like forest therapy. So it was a 3-hour session. I had 4 clients. It was in a botanic gardens. And the first thing I do is, of course, I go through all the risk management and getting them to sign their disclaimers. And, you have to take care of that in any coaching session. And then it was finding a quiet and safe place for us to sit in a circle. And I introduce them to the practice. I tell them, what is forest therapy? Where does it come from? What is Shrinin-yoku? What are the health benefits? And I would, not in too much detail, but in sufficient amount of detail, I would give them information about the physical health benefits, the mental health benefits. So once they have that understanding, I would then give them a bit of a quick bit of information as to what we will be doing during this session, because naturally people are saying, so what happens? What are we going to do? People come sometimes with question marks. Oh, I don't know what. Is it safe? I think safety is a really important aspect for people when you work outdoors. So you have to take that into consideration even before the walk. Forest therapy coaches or guides spend a lot of time walking the trail, making sure it's safe. Even the day before we before actually start the walk, we'll go there 1 hour ahead. So these are things that a coach would not have to do if they were doing this work inside, but outside the dynamic is quite different. So that when we meet our participants, we are ready to give them a real overview of what's going to happen over the next 2-3 hours. And then we find again, we would walk, for example, if it's in a botanic gardens, we would walk to a quiet area where we can stand in a circle. And I would lead them into sort of an activity which we call tuning the senses. And that's all about getting people to put their bags on the ground or on a bench, find a safe and quiet place to sit or stand. And I lead them through almost sort of a body scan, if that's probably a more familiar term. But it's about first, just relaxing the body, getting the stressed body or the stressed person who has rushed to get to your session in her car, driving through traffic, just supporting them to leave that and to release all that tension and stress. And tune into the sights, the sounds, the smells, the feel of nature right there in that moment. So it's a lot about coming to present moment awareness. That takes about 20 minutes, sometimes 25 minutes. And that really speaks to the science of slowing down and connecting to a parasympathetic nervous system, slowing down and quietening the sympathetic nervous system so that the parasympathetic nervous system begins to help us to slow down, to release the cortisol, to release the stress. Once that begins to happen, I lead them on a gentle meander through a natural setting or a botanic gardens or a forest. So it's all about quietening the mind, slowing the body, bringing awareness to what's happening around us. And we do it in quietness while we are walking. And the slow walking sometimes can be quite challenging to people because we typically walk no more than 1 kilometer for 3 hours. And as we continue to walk, we might stop, we will pause, we'll gather to share sometimes about the experience, and we'll continue as guides to offer different sensory and creative practices. So we would do something like noticing the colors, noticing textures, noticing shape, meeting a tree. When have you last actually stopped and looked at a tree, really looked or touched a tree and spent some time? No compulsion to hug a tree, no requirement. And that's the thing about these sessions. There is no requirement. There's no prescribed way to participate. It's all about each person doing it to their level of comfort, following their curiosity. And the guide simply supports each one of the participants to connect to nature, to connect to the forest in a way that feels right and it feels good for them. And I have had individual clients who may be going through something traumatic as having a partner in hospital who's on, in some very bad stage of their health. I've had people who are coming out of cancer. I have had people who are dealing with grief, loss, and more people now coming because I think the pandemic has really shaken them into an understanding of, I need to take care of my health. I need to spend more time outdoors, breathing fresh air. And I would also like to spend some time with a small group of people just to experience communicating with other people. We live in a time of a pandemic of loneliness. People are so desperate to go out there and meet like-minded people, but in a safe setting. And this is where forest therapy coaching or forest therapy guiding really, really helps. We end the session with a tea ceremony, a Japanese-inspired tea ceremony, and each guide will have their own way of preparing tea. In Australia, we use bush food or flowers or leaves, and it's the most beautiful time for people to bring this experience to a close and for people to just basically flop on the ground and just lie there and not want to go away. They just want to stay there as long as they can. But this is also a time for us to taste the forest or nature, something from nature. There's a bit of discussion, there's a bit of reflection. And it's also a nice way then for people to walk away back to their normal life, having learned something, having some tools maybe to help them better manage the stress that's coming on in life, which is something we can't really get away from. And we even give them a forest therapy prescription. We tell them, take this prescription with you, stick it on your refrigerator so that at any time you feel stressed, how about you try this? Just go to your garden and sit for a few minutes without your phone. And that's another thing. We almost insist on people putting off their phones when they come on a forest therapy session. So we encourage people to have a sit spot practice. Even if they're going on a walk, to take a moment even if you're walking your dog, stop and just close your eyes for a minute and just tune into the sounds and then continue to walk. If you're walking with a friend, perhaps instead of, chitter, chatter all the time, just tell your friend, perhaps this is a nice moment. How about we just sit here for a moment in silence and just listen to the sound of the birds? These little micro moments have great pleasure and also benefits for mind and body. Because as we know, we are in a constant cycle of cortisol, of stress. And if we puncture these with little moments of mindfulness in nature, I think it will really help us cope better.
There's such powerful things that you're sharing there, and thank you so much for going into the level of detail. So that, I mean, I was enthralled with you whilst you were talking there, and I was almost feeling like I was on a journey with you on one of your forest bathing sessions, just by listening to you just talk through, a sort of a rough idea of the structure of the kinds of things you might do with your clients. And I was getting very relaxed, actually, as you were talking, very relaxed indeed, which is good, because I was a bit stressed before we started recording this session. So thank you, I really appreciate that. And I really do think a lot of our listeners and watchers will feel the same. It's one of those experiences, as Anna Marie said before, that it's becoming more and more known now, especially in the Western world. And I think a lot of people want to experience it and might, not necessarily know where to. So when we do release your episode, we will put some resources up there for some of the more UK-based forest therapy activities, because obviously it's a long way to travel to come and see you in Australia, as much as I'm sure we'd love to actually experience one of your sessions actually in Melbourne or in the surrounding area. So you're currently the president for the International Nature and Forest Therapy Alliance. How did you get involved in that particular organisation, and what kind of initiatives are you working towards or focusing on at the moment?
So in 2017, and this was soon after I got back from Japan, I was very excited and full of ideas. And I just knew we had to do something more than say, aha, this is great, we can go on some walks. I really felt there was a need, like I said, to build these bridges to Japan and other countries, and also to replicate some of that amazing research that had been done in these countries. Because quite often we are asked, and rightly so, and so what about our forests? What about our nature? And are the landscapes where we live, are they as beneficial? Do they have the same benefits as in Japan? The research was done in the 1980s, a little bit into the 1990s and early 2000s, but basically nothing much more. So I thought, okay, I've made these amazing connections. I have some really good friends and colleagues who have, the research brain in them. Let's put our collective minds together and hearts and start an organization which can do this, which can bring resources together, and let's work together so that we can take this to a broader international audience, and hopefully we can make forest therapy a public health practice. That was for me the end game. I wanted governments and local councils and companies to recognize forest therapy as a public health practice. And what I mean was ease of access for anybody who wanted and needed a prescription to go into nature. And if forest therapy was going to be that way, and that was going to offer that modality, then I wanted that. So actually, I founded INFTA, I have proud to say, and I had some amazing people join me. If you look at our advisory board, we have Professor Miyazaki from Japan. He's kind of, the person to be there. We have very recently spoken to a lovely young man in Canada who's a naturopath, and he will be joining our advisory board. So it's not only, wise people who have been doing this for a long time. I also want to have to be able to speak to a demographic of younger people. Because you'll find a lot of science and research rests up there in the, in the 50s and the 60s. But where are the people that we really need to speak to when we see the alarming rates of mental health and anxiety in younger populations? And actually, I feel sorry for some of the governments, because they have their back against the wall with really very little that they know what to do and how to do it. So my whole intention, thinking about what INFTA wants to do in the future, is to continue to engage with decision makers, with policy makers, with governments, so that we can take forest therapy forward as a green prescription. We can train sufficient amount of guides who can then be there to offer the services and to offer that help where it's needed. To train doctors and other allied health professionals in forest therapy as a professional development course, and to be able to do all of that in an increasingly technologically connected world. And what I mean by that is to be able to offer these courses and these trainings and this professional development through online platforms. And I'm very proud to say that we have an amazing learning management system through which we can do that. Because we can talk a lot about policy, we can talk a lot about the science and the research, but we need to have guides on the ground, in nature, in forests, and perhaps even have communities and people being able to sign up to these walks through NHS or whatever system you have in the UK and the US, so that people can get a prescription from their doctor and don't have to pay for it. Now, this might challenge the pharmaceutical industry, who doesn't like the talk of preventative health, but heck, we are beyond that point. We have been through a pandemic. I don't think there's any need for further discussion. This is a no-brainer. It just needs to be done. That's me being the president of INFTA with a very clear message to anyone who's listening. We are here to make it happen. Just come support us.
I love it. I love it. A bit of a challenge to the pharmaceutical industry is strongly needed. And I just think it says so much about global society when we're needing prescriptions for nature. It just says so much in our evolution as human beings, where we've come from and where we've got to and where we need to go back to ultimately to regain some sanity. And this, you talk about the research and how that was carried out, in the 80s and 90s, and the forest that it was done in Japan. And it just really, caught my attention within England. For us in England, we are the least densely forested country in Europe. Only 2.5% of our ancient woodland remains, which is it's just embarrassing, just the state to which we've come. And okay, it is what it is. How can we actually have a turning point? How can we actually do something about this? Which is why I loved hearing you talk about this really kind of pragmatic approach. It's like, yes, we've got the research. Yes, policy needs to change, and often that it takes a lot of time. What can we do about it now? Let's get ultimately people outdoors in whatever capacity that we can. And great work, and I'd really encourage people to kind of check out your website and what courses are there as well. And just I've kind of in a way talked a little bit about the state of woodland, or lack of, and clearly we've got forest therapy kind of coming through within the UK, but within Australia it would just to have an insight into what is going on there. And how coaching outdoors is viewed within the Australian coaching profession. Like, what changes have you seen happening over the last few years, and where do you see the future going?
I have to say, it takes a woman in leadership to get things going. Agree with me or not? When I started INFTA in Australia, people just assume we are based in Australia and therefore we must be an Australian organization. So I'm always reminding them we are lucky that we are headquartered in in Australia, in Melbourne, but we are very much of an international organization. The reason I'm talking to you guys, one in Scotland and one in England. So Australia, therefore, benefited from our presence here. I was one of those people who knocked on doors and I wouldn't stop knocking till I got an answer. Whether it was a no or a yes, and I rarely took a no, but I was very happy that was a yes. And 3 years ago, I knocked on the doors of the Royal Botanic Gardens in Melbourne. And they, after some discussions and talks and some demonstration of forest therapy walks, we started and we advertised the first forest therapy session in the Royal Botanic Gardens, Melbourne. You would not believe, within hours of that advertisement going out, we had like 25 people on the wait list. We had people rocking up on the Sunday morning, sitting at the visitor center, hoping that somebody's not going to turn up so that they could get a ticket. And we have sustained that level of interest 3 years on. And now we have walks in the Botanic Gardens, all 3 of them in New South Wales, which is the most populated state of Australia. We continue to run. So these are public walks I'm talking about, but now we have also seen a massive uptick, particularly after the pandemic, in private walks. So companies wanting to book in for mental health days, whatever day, Earth Day, whatever day it is that celebrates nature, they want a forest therapy session. So that has created an amazing awareness within the coaching community. With the counseling community, we have had amazing results with counselors becoming forest therapy guides, and the stories that I hear about years and years of counseling. I'm not saying counseling is not good or there's no benefits to it, but years and years of counseling in what I mentioned earlier, in a 4-walled of white, sorry, you'll have to edit that. You know what I mean? 4 walls in a white room, not even a view of a plant or a view outside. Nothing happens for years and years, no breakthrough. One session later, outside, just in the same building, just in the garden outside, and suddenly the tears are flowing, the heart is exposed, the woes come out, and the solution is on its way. That is the interest that forest therapy has created in the coaching community. I've just had a guide in Western Australia sign up to do with the International Coaching Federation. And she said, Susan, doing the coaching qualification, having done my forest therapy guide training, has really opened a lot more work for me as well in the corporate sector. And I see this trend continuing. I see this trend because everyone in any realm of the work we do, whether we are coaches or forest therapy guides, the pandemic has really made people aware of the benefits. And I don't know how much you know about what we went through here in Melbourne. We had the world's most strictest lockdowns ever. And it's amazing how it has completely changed today. But that really opened people's minds to how important it is. People are growing tomatoes in their backyards, things that they had never done before. And they've stuck with it. That's the great thing. Some people have, we missed our coffee out and our family outings, but that breakthrough has somehow stayed with people. I think that's a really important point. So to your question about coaching outdoors in Australia, INFTA's presence here, and also the publication of the International Handbook of Forest Therapy, which was put together by Dr. Dieter Cotter, who's our strategic advisor, and also the secretary to INFTA. That handbook, I'm not sure whether you've heard or seen, it's a compendium of the most relevant research from the disciplines that inform forest therapy. So if you're talking about psychotherapy, qigong, yoga, all these disciplines that draw inspiration from nature, they've all been put together in this handbook. And I think that handbook has really given us credibility in terms of an organization that promotes forest therapy as a public health practice. That's really important. And that credibility has held us in good stead. And the guides that come to our training and then take that training onwards to flourish in what they do, I think is a good indication of where this movement is taking the whole industry. And yeah, there's so much work and such a little time. So, still it's tireless work, but it invigorates me every single day to continue to do the work.
It's always interesting hearing about what's going on in other parts of the world, because obviously Anna Maria and I are quite kind of tuned into what's going on in the UK and into Europe a bit as well. But we love talking to our international guests for this very reason, just learning a bit more about, things like that International Handbook of Forest Therapy. I didn't know that existed, and now I do, and now our listeners do as well. And these are the kind of resources we would love to share with our listeners and our watchers, because they might not ever come across them or might not ever find them. And by making these connections with people like yourselves, somewhere miles and miles and miles away on the other side of the world, it just makes those things much more accessible. And as you said, it hopefully makes your work easier as well, because you're sharing that knowledge, you're sharing that understanding, and more people will have those moments of, that sounds fascinating, I want to know more, and will hopefully come back and as you said before, support you and others like yourselves around the world who are sharing this wonderful information. And as per, our listeners will know that research is my big thing. I'm starting to plan my next piece of research as well. So I love anything that has that element to it as well. And I know a number of our listeners and watchers are the same. So anything that really backs up what we know from our gut and our experience, backing it up with the science to explain why and the how as well is really important. You're very, very, very active on LinkedIn, and you share so many amazing resources. And even, I think it was yesterday or the day before, you shared a wonderful book, Finding the Mother Tree by Susan Simard. I went straight online and ordered it. It's literally arriving in the post to me today. I'm on holiday in a couple of weeks, so it's one of my holiday reading books. So thank you for that. So, I would highly recommend anybody who's listening or watching to follow you, because you really do share some amazing resources. What would you recommend to anybody who's kind of starting out in the world of maybe this forest medicine, forest therapy? Are there any resources that you can sort of really kind of point them in the direction to say, here's a good way to kind of get into the topic and really kind of understand it from the basics up?
Yeah, good question. I think the first thing is go on a forest therapy walk yourself. There are some amazing guides in Europe, in the UK. We have a guide, actually one of the first guides I trained traveled all the way from Scotland to train with us, Rory McPhee. So check out Rory, but there are amazing guides. There are amazing guides around the UK and in Scotland. I think that's the first thing. You go and experience a session for yourself. And then when you want to, and most of the guides would give you a pretty thorough rundown of the benefits. They will have their own websites with a lot of resources. But like I said, if you want to really go deep and understand, the International Handbook of Forest Therapy is a great resource. It is published by a UK publishing company, Cambridge Publishers. So postage is pretty good for you guys if you want to order it. But also the INFTA website has a tab on the science and the research, and Dr. Cotter maintains that. So he's always putting up the latest research there. If you want to sort of get a sort of introduction, we also offer a foundation course through the website. So you'll be sent a link, and that gives you a little, not too much, but just enough of the science and a few personal practices that you can start for yourself to experience the benefits of forest therapy for yourself. That's another great way to understand. But, there's so much on our website that you can just look at. And I tend to go down a rabbit hole of research because there's so much of great stuff. And forest therapy is informed by other disciplines like horticulture therapy. like Qigong, like Tai Chi. What else? Physiology, psychology. There's a lot of research that begins to tap into, if you start here, you sort of find yourself going off in all directions and then coming back to forest therapy. And this is why the handbook, I think, is a good research, is a good point, is a good, one-stop shop of everything there. Of course, I would love if people follow me on LinkedIn. I tend to be very thoughtful about what I share on LinkedIn. It's a different audience to Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. I love my quotes. My quotes are everything to me. And there are so many beautiful quotes about nature, from John Muir to Robert Macfarlane. He's an amazing British writer. I love his work. I love the songs that have, the spell songs that have come out from his work. So it's not all about heavy research stuff. There's also very much some, resources and people who write beautiful poetry. They draw beautiful nature journaling. I love nature journaling. I tell people, if you want to know about nature, do some nature journaling. There's so much out there. But if people follow me on LinkedIn, yes, I'm sure they'll find some interesting stuff there. And our website.
Perfect. Thank you. Wow, what a journey from Sri Lanka to Australia, stopping off in Rwanda and Japan. I know that you were in Germany as well a couple of months ago, supporting some training. A real globetrotter, and it's just been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation. We were both looking forward to it for so long, and just some of the kind of sentences I've just been noting down, and I'm really looking forward to kind of going back and listening to this episode again, because Alex and I always kind of listen to them again, and getting that kind of second learning from when you're not involved with the conversation, you can be a listener, is always really revealing. And I just, that real healing happens outside, just to kind of offer you one of your quotes back to you. And I would really just offer this for people to take away. When have you actually last stopped to look at a tree? So as you move throughout the rest of your day, and for me, it transported me back to Schumacher College, a place down in Devon, where last summer I went on a course, Soulful Connection with Trees, and just sitting in the presence of trees and the different energy that you get from whether it's a birch tree, a beech tree, an oak tree, and actually how you can identify them blindfolded just by the energy that you can really feel into, which if you'd told me that 10 years ago, I'd have been like, you're talking total woo-woo, but I get it. So once you've experienced it, and as you say, it is all about that experience. So again, if you've not tried forest bathing, try it out, and ground and land and be present and be still, which for me as a runner, I love to move through the landscape, and hearing you talk about hiking, and it's about the destination, and it's that different, for me, being running and immersed in that moment as you move through the landscape, but actually by stopping and being still, it's a different connection. And when we're also busy in our lives and moving and doing, actually doing nothing and just dialing into our senses and being present in the moment can be really transformative. So thank you so much. I'm just going to pause if there's anything else you'd just like to say or thank our listeners and watchers, just to bring everything to a close.
Well, it was delightful to be featured here. Thank you for the opportunity. I think the message for me on forest therapy is it's accessible to anyone. There are no special skills that you need. You don't need any particular physicality to participate and be with and in nature. And it's also, for me, a reminder to everyone to give yourself permission to stop and notice, to step outside. And if you can't step outside, especially as we are getting into spring. I know the rest, Europe and the Northern Hemisphere is going into colder, but beautiful weather. Every season has a magic and a beauty. And if you still can't step outside, just look through your window, look at the sky, look at the clouds. we need to give ourselves permission to do this. Nobody can take that away from us, and those moments without a phone, without taking a picture for Instagram, is what carries us through for many, many years to come. And we can all do this, and we should do this. And that's my message to each and every one of our listeners. Just give yourself permission to slow down and just be with nature.
Perfect. Thank you. And particularly as we are in the season of equinox within the UK, it is that turning, and it is just time to just pause when everything else seems to be speeding up, that shift from summer to autumn. So thank you so much, and we will signpost all the resources that you have mentioned. That will be up on the website. To everyone who has taken the time out of their day to join us, thank you so much. If you haven't dipped into our treasure trove of episodes, we would be super grateful if you could check them out. And if you haven't joined our LinkedIn community, please come and find us there. And if you think you know someone who might be interested in listening in, we would be really, really grateful if you could share our podcast to others within your network as well. So thank you very much, and look forward to you joining us for another episode.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard,
Like it,
share across your network.
and subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast.
Thanks so much in advance for your support.